We love family, we love friends. This is the enemy, this my friend. We love family, we love friends.
Morning, morning. What was all the somber singing?
Oh, morning, Bobby. I'm just a little sad and a little angry.
Come here, my friend. Why are you sad?
Well, I was listening on the radio and a song came on about AIDS, and I started thinking about all those innocent babies born with HIV and AIDS. And I hate that there's nothing we can do about it.
No. There's definitely something that can be done.
Really? Then why don't we do it?
Come, let's go inside. We'll have a cup of coffee and chat with the boys. They'll have answers.
Okay.
Welcome to our new learning series in development studies from NAMCOR. In program 3 today, we take a look at the role of education in the prevention of HIV and AIDS. Our lesson objectives are that after watching this program, you should be able to recognize the role of education in the prevention of HIV and AIDS. Thanks for watching and enjoy the lesson with us.
Dude, Chelsea's such a whack team.
Bruh, don't even tell me about Chelsea. You should have seen the menu game last weekend, man. It was something else.
I know, right?
What? You guys don't look too good. What happened?
Well, Lynn is a bit sad.
Len?
What's wrong, Lynn? Why are you sad?
Oh, nothing. I was just listening to the radio when a song came on about AIDS. The people dying, the children, the mothers, the fathers, the babies.
Yo. No, man. No.
Well, I was just telling Bobby how frustrating it is that there's nothing we can do. And she said there is, and that you guys would know more.
Yeah, maybe.
What are you referring to, Bobby?
I'm not sure. All I know is that this is an issue affecting sub-Saharan Africa, and Namibia is part of it. So we need to find a solution.
Bobby?
Guys, I was referring to education. Education plays a vital role in the prevention of HIV and AIDS for so many reasons.
And what are these reasons?
I know these could be when you're aware and educated on the spread of HIV and AIDS, you help make appropriate life choices for yourself and others to help prevent this infection.
Guys, take a look at this. You know what? This is an overview of the critical roles that education plays in the prevention of HIV and AIDS and also dealing with it. Yeah, look at this.
Education is about learning to know. It allows us to obtain comprehensive and accurate information about diseases. Education is about learning to do. We can acquire the necessary skills to enhance our ability to protect ourselves against HIV and AIDS. Education is also about learning to live together. It allows us to have a compassionate, caring, and non-judgmental approach to everyone, irrespective of their HIV status. Lastly, education is about learning to be alert. It supports the development of life-affirming attitudes and value systems that help us make healthy life choices, resist negative pressures, and minimize harmful behavior.
The other day, I read a comprehensive educational response to HIV and AIDS, which lists 3 elements that need to be incorporated. 3 elements of comprehensive educational response: ensuring universal access to education, adapting curricula and programs to promote HIV prevention, developing mechanisms and strategies for highlighting the impact of HIV and AIDS on learners, educators, and the education system.
All right. So education is important, but how does it help?
Well, you see, adolescents who are more educated or know more about HIV and AIDS are most likely to get tested. And education also reduces discrimination against people who are HIV positive, of course. So without it, this discrimination could lead to adolescents dropping out of school.
And they say in Latin America, people with secondary school education are 45% more tolerant towards people with HIV than those with only primary education.
Yeah, you know what, bruh? I actually read that educating girls about HIV and AIDS is actually very good.
Yeah.
And why would they say such a statement?
Evidence from several EFA reports, Education for All, shows that educating girls saves lives and also helps improve HIV prevention and care. Young women account for more than 60% of people living with HIV. In sub-Saharan Africa, the figure is 71%. Educating young women reduces the risk of HIV infection by empowering them to assert their sexual and reproductive rights. They are more likely to know how HIV is transmitted and that using condoms can reduce the risk of transmission.
It could also be, in this case of HIV and AIDS, mothers who are more educated are most likely to get tested during pregnancy, and they know that HIV can be transmitted through breastfeeding. They are also more likely to know that the mother-to-child transmission can be reduced by taking antiretroviral drugs during pregnancy. Only 27% of women without education in Malawi were aware of this, compared to 60% of women with secondary education or higher.
And actually, you know what? Ensuring that all children go to school is actually very essential because, statistics actually show that the longer time, young people spend in school, the more aware they are about HIV and AIDS. They are more inclined to take protective measures such as using condoms, getting tested, and discussing AIDS with their partners. Schooling reduces the risk of HIV infection, but needs to play a bigger part in communicating knowledge about HIV and AIDS.
The 2012 EFA Global Monitoring Reports show that only 36% of 13-year-olds in Southern and Eastern Africa meet the minimum knowledge requirement level for HIV and AIDS, but only 7% reach the desirable level. Curriculum must be better designed to incorporate health, sexuality, and HIV and AIDS education, using a life skills approach. Botswana introduced an HIV and AIDS awareness curriculum in 2006. Knowledge of HIV and AIDS among young people rose from 28% to 45%, and the HIV infection rate was halved between 2001 and 2009.
But why do you need to educate people on HIV and AIDS? Why not just make a cure?
There are three main reasons to AIDS education. The first of which is to prevent new infections from taking place. This can be seen as consisting of two processes. Giving people information about HIV, what HIV and AIDS are, how they are transmitted, and how people can protect themselves from infection. Teaching people how to put this information to use and act on it practically. How to get and use condoms. How to suggest and practice safer sex. How to prevent infections in a medical environment or when injecting drugs. The second reason why AIDS education is needed is to improve quality of life for HIV-positive people. Too often, AIDS education is seen as being something which should be targeted only at people who are not infected with HIV in order to prevent them from becoming infected. When AIDS education with HIV-positive people is considered at all, it is frequently only seen in terms of preventing new infections by teaching HIV-positive people about the importance of not passing on the virus. An important and commonly neglected aspect of AIDS education with HIV-positive people is enabling and empowering them to improve their quality of life. HIV-positive people have varying educational needs, but among them are the needs to be able to access medical services and drug provision, and the need to be able to find appropriate emotional and practical support and help. The third reason people need AIDS education is to reduce stigma and discrimination. In many countries, there is a great deal of fear and stigmatization of people who are HIV positive. This fear is too often accompanied by ignorance, resentment, and ultimately anger. Sometimes the results of prejudice and fear can be extreme, with HIV-positive people being burned to death in India and many families being forced to leave their homes across the United States when neighbors discover a family member's positive status. Discrimination against positive people can help the AIDS epidemic spread. If people are fearful of being tested for HIV, they are more likely to pass the infection to someone else without knowing.
Guys, I feel stupid asking this question, but who needs to be educated?
That is not a stupid question. And the answer is anyone who is vulnerable to HIV and AIDS, and of course, almost everyone is vulnerable. Unless those that know how to protect themselves. Look here, It is not only young people, gay men, and drug injecting users that get infected. But you see, this virus has affected a cross-section in society. You see, and this means that education ought not only to be, targeted amongst those groups, that are called high risk, but to every group.
It's all good and well to educate young people, but it's usually the adults who get infected. In recent years, there's been very little HIV education targeted towards the adults. Essentially, the people who are in most urgent need of HIV education are those who don't think they're at risk.
Yes, and for which I would say both men and women, and not girls as earlier stated.
Yeah.
Now look, here is my suggestion.
People who have already been educated for whom the education was not effective. If AIDS education were completely effective, there wouldn't be nearly so many new infections. These infections do not only occur amongst young people. Many people who have already experienced AIDS education continue to become infected with HIV. Everyone needs to learn how and why not to discriminate against positive people. People who are not HIV positive must learn how the virus is transmitted in order to protect themselves from infection. At the same time, they must also learn how the virus is not transmitted. People need to know that they cannot become infected from such things as sharing food, towels, or toilets. This will help reduce discrimination against positive people by reducing ignorance and fear. People who are already infected also require education. Initially, these must involve an element of counseling and support, and must teach them about living well with HIV, the tests they may need to have, and the medication they may need to take. They must also learn about HIV transmission and safer sex for 2 reasons. They need to know how to live positively without passing the virus on to anyone else. And they need to know how to avoid coming into contact with a strain of the virus which differs from the one they already have. The only people who do not fall into one of these groups are those who have received AIDS education, have taken it in, and have the resources to turn knowledge into action. One group who should hopefully fall into this category are AIDS educators. They may seem obvious, but in many cases, teachers may require teaching themselves. They may be called upon to act as AIDS educators when they themselves have little experience or knowledge of the subject. Peer educators must also receive training, even if they themselves are HIV positive. Information for teachers and HIV educators will be found here.
Alright, so just to sum up what all of you have said, and correct me if I'm wrong. So, if the AIDS education that had been done up until now were effective, then there wouldn't be millions of new infections around the world, right?
Yes.
So it's clear that the campaigns that have been done so far have failed to prevent the spread of the virus. So the message needs to be repeated in different forms until people appreciate it, or hopefully until education is no longer needed.
That's right.
So the message may not have prevented the spread, but it has helped to a certain extent. So I do agree with you that the message needs to be repeated through different forms. So you see, there is a lot we can do to eradicate this illness.
That's very true.
Wow, thank you guys. I feel much better and empowered too.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So, can I have that coffee now?
Sure, Jason, make it for you.
Viewers, I hope you have enjoyed our lesson presentation on the role of education in the prevention of HIV and AIDS. Now, before we say goodbye, we must highlight a few points on the role of education in the prevention of HIV and AIDS. Education plays a critical role in preventing the spread of HIV and AIDS. We discussed why it is important to be well informed on this topic and how education plays a role both in the lives of individuals and the nation in combating this pandemic. Ensuring universal access to education, adapting curricula and programs to promote HIV prevention, and developing mechanisms and strategies for highlighting the impact of HIV and AIDS on learners, educators, and the education system. I hope you have enjoyed watching and learning with us. See you again soon. Bye-bye.